Hello class, and welcome to Module 5, or I like to consider it Week 5. We're going to be talking about human trafficking and police response. Alright, so in human trafficking, it is defined by the Trafficking Victims Protection Act and the UNTIP protocol using three elements: acts, means, and purpose. Movement is not required. Victims may be exploited within their own homes or communities. For minors in commercial sex, proof of force, fraud, and coercion is unnecessary because children cannot legally consent. The 2025 Trafficking in Persons report emphasizes that trafficking is about exploitation and control, not transportation. Officers must focus on recruitment, harboring, and coercive tactics rather than stereotypes of kidnapping. Correct classification is critical because misidentification can lead to victims being treated as offenders. Understanding these legal definitions helps law enforcement recognize hidden cases and ensures appropriate victim-centered responses from the first point of contact. Sex trafficking and forced labor are the two primary forms of human trafficking. Research from Shared Hope International shows traffickers commonly rely on psychological manipulation, debt schemes, and threats rather than physical restraint. In labor trafficking, confiscation of documents, wage withholding, and threats of deportation trap victims in involuntary servitude. These crimes frequently occur in ordinary settings such as hotels, farms, factories, or private residence, making detection difficult. Domestic servitude is especially hidden because victims are isolated from public contact. Victims may not attempt escape due to fear, dependency, language barriers, or misinformation about authorities. Recognizing indicators of coercive control is therefore essential for police, healthcare providers, and community members to identify victims who may not self-report their exploitation. Child sex trafficking is legally distinct because any commercial sex involving a minor is trafficking regardless of consent or coercion. The 2025 TIP report stresses that children cannot legally consent to exploitation. Recruitment increasingly occurs online through grooming, sextortion, gaming platforms, or false romantic relationships. Victims often display indicators such as lack of control over identification, rehearsed stories, chronic absence from school, or extreme fear of law enforcement. Trauma-informed policing is critical because aggressive questioning can re-traumatize victims and discourage disclosure. The non-punishment principle requires that minors not be charged for crimes committed under coercion. Early identification and intervention can disrupt exploitation cycles and connect children to protective services, counseling, and long-term support, rather than funneling them into the juvenile justice system. Gangs and organized groups are major drivers of sex trafficking in the United States. Shared Hope International reports that gangs often target vulnerable youths, including runaways, foster children, or those with prior abuse histories. Recruitment methods include promises of love, protection, financial stability, or modeling opportunities, sometimes called Romeo pimping. Control is maintained through violence, threats to family members, substance dependency, and constraint relocations between cities or hotels. Digital platforms allow traffickers to identify and groom victims rapidly while reducing personal risk. For investigators, recognizing patterns such as multiple victims traveling together, scripted responses, or unexplained hotel stays can signal organized exploitation. Understanding gang involvement is critical because trafficking operations frequently intersect with other crimes such as drugs, weapons, and fraud. State-sponsored trafficking occurs when governments or officials directly participate in or enable forced labor or exploitation. The 2025 TIP report highlights cases involving coerced labor programs, confiscation of passports, wage withholdings, and surveillance of workers abroad. Examples include forced labor tied to re-education programs, exploitative overseas labor deployments, or protected scams compounds operating with official tolerance. Official complicity undermines accountability because victims cannot rely on local authorities for protection. International responses include sanctions, visa restrictions, and supply chain audits to prevent goods produced by forced labor from entering global markets. Law enforcement and policymakers must recognize that trafficking is not limited to criminal gangs. It can also be embedded within state systems, requiring diplomatic pressure and international cooperation to combat effectively. Technology plays a dual role in trafficking as both a tool for exploitation and a tool for prevention. Traffickers use social media, encrypted messaging, and automated bots to recruit and groom victims at scale. Emerging risks include AI-generated deepfakes, non-consensual imagery, and sextortion schemes that create leverage without physical contact. The TIP report also identifies cyber-enabled forced labor and scam compounds where victims conduct online fraud under threat. At the same time, technology supports law enforcement through AI-driven ad analysis, pattern detection, and supply chain tracing. Effective responses must balance investigative capability with privacy protections and civil liberties. Understanding this technological landscape is essential because modern trafficking increasingly occurs in digital spaces rather than traditional street-based environments. Victim identification requires a coordinated, multidisciplinary approach. Research shows that healthcare providers encounter many trafficking victims during captivity, often without recognizing the warning signs. Proactive screening in hospitals, schools, shelters, and social services agencies is therefore essential. National referral mechanisms help coordinate responses among law enforcement, non-governmental organizations, and service providers so victims can receive immediate assistance without being required to participate in criminal prosecutions. Trauma-informed and responsive care helps rebuild trust and lowers the risk of victims being exploited again. Legal remedies, including record clearing and expungement process, allow survivors to address criminal charges that resulted from their exploitation. A victim-centered approach prioritizes safety, medical treatment, stable housing, and counseling, recognizing that recovery is a long-term process requiring sustained support well beyond the initial rescue. Intelligence-led policing has evolved to address the growing mobility of organized crime and trafficking networks. Research on modern policing models shows a shift from local crime patterns to transitional threats operating across physical and digital spaces. Frameworks such as the National Intelligence Model classify criminal activity into local, regional, and national levels to improve coordination. However, trafficking networks exploit globalization, rapid travel, and online communications to move victims and profits quickly. Data integration through fusion centers and shared databases enhances situational awareness but requires consent updating. Understanding these trends helps agencies allocate resources strategically and anticipate emerging threats rather than reacting after harm has occurred. Effective intelligence practices are essential for disrupting organized trafficking operations before victims are further exploited. Information sharing barriers significantly weaken law enforcement responses to human trafficking. Organized crime networks exploit fragmented oversight, disconnected databases, and slow cross-border legal process to operate undetected. Intelligence-led policing research shows that traffickers move quickly across jurisdictions, while law enforcement data often moves slowly through bureaucratic channels. High reporting thresholds and manual processing create blind spots, causing agencies to duplicate investigations or miss critical connections. These systematic gaps reduce victim identification and limit successful prosecutions. When intelligence is not shared in real time, policing remains reactive rather than proactive. Strengthening interagency coordination, improving data integration, and reducing structural barriers are essential steps toward disrupting trafficking networks before further exploitation occurs. Technology-driven solutions offer a path forward for combating trafficking more effectively. Interoperable database and single search platforms allow investigators to access information across agencies in real time, reducing duplication and delays. Machine learning can identify hidden relationships, predict trafficking routes, and detect suspicious patterns in financial transactions or online advertisements. Standardized information requests streamline international cooperation, while role-based access controls protect sensitive data from misuse. However, technological tools must be accompanied by cultural change, including interagency trust and joint training. Effective governance ensures accountability and privacy protection. By combining advanced analytical with collaboration, law enforcement can shift from reactive casework to proactive disruption of trafficking networks, improving victims' identification and reducing opportunities for organized exploitation to flourish. In conclusion, human trafficking is a complex crime that operates across physical, social, and digital environments, requiring coordinated responses from law enforcement, service providers, and policymakers. It involves not only organized criminal groups, but also technological exploitation and, in some cases, officially complicity. Effective intervention depends on accurate identification of victims, also trauma-informed practices and intelligence-led policing that adapts to rapidly evolving methods used by traffickers. Overcoming barriers such as fragmented data systems, jurisdictional gaps, and lack of awareness is essential to disrupting these networks. Most importantly, responses must prioritize victim safety, recovery, and long-term support rather than solely focusing on prosecution. By combining prevention, protection, partnership, and prosecution strategies, agencies can move from reactive responses to proactive disruption, ultimately reducing exploitation and strengthening community resilience against trafficking. That will conclude the module, which is number 5. Again, I like to call it week 5. But remember, your initial post is due by Wednesday, and respond to 3 others by Sunday. If you have any questions, just please go ahead and email me. If you need to call me, my number is in the database. Just text me before you call. Thanks. Bye-bye.